100 countries will scrutinise a first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. The paper published this morning urges nations to revisit and strengthen their emissions targets for 2030 so that global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Wales has announced COVID passes will be required to enter cinemas, theatres and concert halls from Monday. Protesters have been demonstrating against the extended measures. Currently, proof of full vaccination or a negative test result is only needed for nightclubs and other large events. Prince Harry claims he warned Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey that his site was allowing a coup to be staged a day before the January riots at the US Capitol. It comes as a federal judge rejected former President Donald Trump's request to block the release of documents to the House committee investigating the incident. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll have more on all of those stories for you at 10 o'clock.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We're here with you all the way through until midday, giving you all the top stories of the day and discussing the issues you're talking about at home. So here's what's coming up on today's show.
Yes, no jab, no job. That's the government message to NHS staff. Despite chronic understaffing, up to 100,000 staff in England face losing their jobs now if they're not vaccinated by the April deadline set by the Health Secretary. We'll speak to a consultant surgeon with 30 years' experience in the NHS to ask what damage this could do.
Yes, and over in Wales, it's official. If you want to visit a cinema, a concert hall or theatre, you'll now have to provide evidence that you've either been double jabbed or have a negative lateral flow test. We'll bring you the latest on this after last night's vote in the Senate.
We will indeed. Also on the show, after a particularly tense week in Parliament over second jobs and MPs making thousands of pounds on the side, Labour has set its sights on Sir Geoffrey Cox, calling for a standards investigation into his work for the British Virgin Islands. We'll have more on that shortly.
Yes, and as usual, we'd like to hear from you as well, so make sure you get in touch with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on excessive police powers.
We've seen some pretty egregious misuses of police power in recent times, but a story that emerged yesterday really took the biscuit. A terminally ill man had just found out that he's destined to die, and he decided to draw up his bucket list. On that bucket list was mooneying a speed camera. I think we can all relate to that. That sinking feeling that you get when you're driving around, boom, a big flash goes off behind you and you confront the crushing reality that you're doing 34 in a 30 and now you have to go on a speed awareness course because you're clearly a threat to civilization. So, Daryl Meekham saw his chance and he took it. His wife nipped into Tesco Express and Daryl seized the moment. He got out of his car and he approached a mobile speed camera in Stourbridge. The belt came off, the pants came down, the bottom came out. Anyway, 20 minutes later, Daryl gets a knock on his door. He's confronted by no less than 6 police officers who say they want to arrest him for indecent exposure. Daryl doesn't let them in, so they kick his garden gate down, naturally. He's then pinned to the ground and has his face smashed into the dirt of his own back garden. He tells them he's terminally ill. He also has Parkinson's disease. He's a wheelchair user. You know what I find absolutely staggering? That West Mercia police were seemingly unable to uncover the UK's largest ever grooming gang scandal, which happened right under their noses for decades in Telford. But within 20 minutes of a terminally ill man mooning a speed camera, they can send 6 officers round and make a quick arrest. If Daryl had sat in front of that mobile speed camera, said he was from Insulate Britain and glued his hand to the road, the police would have just got out and offered him tea and biscuits. They'd have asked if there's anything they can do to make him feel comfortable. West Mercia police are forced that, and this will come as no shock, has previously been branded inadequate, can never complain again about not having enough resources. They must have too many police, surely, if they had 6 going spare to race around to a dying man's house that quickly. I'm happy to report on national television that West Mercia is obviously a crime-free zone because there weren't any burglaries that needed investigating, no murder inquiries to solve or rapists that need to be tracked down. West Mercia's Police and Crime Commissioner, John Campion, has refused to come on the show. He's refused to comment. He says it's an ongoing investigation. I mean, it will hardly take MI5 to crack this case, will it? The man flashed a police camera. Presumably there's footage of him doing it. He's actually admitted it, so it's pretty much open and shut, isn't it? I suppose there's still a chance that Daryl might get away with it. If Mr Campion decides to put the same investigators on this case as those who managed to miss the systematic abuse of more than 1,000 vulnerable young girls by a huge grooming gang, Daryl will probably get off scot-free. According to West Mercia's Police's website, Mr Campion's salary is about $76,500, although a Wikipedia search indicates that it may be about $85k. You'd have thought, considering that we pay his wages, he might be inclined to have fronted up to this and explained why his officers behaved like a pack of rabid dogs. The fact is that if the police forces in that area cared as much about sexual abuse as they do about someone flashing one of their speed cameras, then thousands of girls wouldn't have had their lives ruined. Daryl has been diagnosed with multiple system atrophy, which is a debilitating brain disease with no known cure. Are the police really going to drag him to court and make the final period of his life an absolute nightmare? I mean, they might have already given him COVID, for goodness sake. I couldn't see any of those officers wearing masks. They were rubbing all over him. It wasn't a particularly socially distanced arrest. And let's think about the cost for the taxpayer, shall we? If it goes to court, we have to pay for the prosecution. We may well end up paying for the defence. We will have to pay the magistrate. Sometimes there's a few of them. We pay the clerk. We pay the staff. Also, a terminally ill man who is having a laugh can get fined a couple of £100. Does anybody want that? No. West Mercia police should hang their heads in shame. They're supposed to uphold the law and order, not bully the vulnerable.
I have to disagree with you.
I know you do, yes.
This will split, I'm sure this will split people. Actually, it'll be interesting to see where people stand on this, our viewers. So get in touch, GBViews.
You think he broke the law, obviously.
Well, look,
of course he did break the law.
Well, I just think, OK, it's a bit of a laugh, I get it, fine. But at the end of the day, if you flash if you indecently expose yourself deliberately to a police van, because it was a mobile speed camera, so he was exposing himself to a sort of a van with a mobile speed camera with police in it. And then it does say that when they tried to take his plates down, he drove off, obviously went home, and then that's how the police managed to find him. I just think, you know, it's idiotic. It's idiotic.
Yeah, it is, but it's the police response, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, but he triggered that response. Of course, the police, if you flash a police officer, there's nobody surely who thinks if they were to go out on the streets today and flash a police officer that they wouldn't expect the police to do something about it. So we can't just we can't lay the blame entirely on the police. Yes, 6 people, obviously excessive. But look, if you flash a police officer, then you should expect repercussions, surely.
Yeah, but I wouldn't expect to have a terminally ill man have his face ground
Yeah, but they didn't know. They didn't know he was terminally ill when they turned up to his house and.
Well, they told them. So that's,
and he didn't let them in. So he has 3 crimes, in my opinion, not literal crimes, but he did 3 major things wrong. Obviously, flashing at the police officer. Okay, he might think it's a bit of a laugh, it's on his bucket list, but it's still illegal. Then he drove off, and then he didn't let them in when they knocked. So, of course, they had to break the door down. I mean, it's just one thing after another. Unfortunately, obviously, you know, what happened, I'm not condoning them sort of slamming him onto the ground, 6 of them.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, but that's all I'm saying, isn't it? I'm not saying that, oh, you know, this guy was right to flash a police camera. I do think it's quite funny, but I'm not saying he was right to do that. My entire thing is I think the police response was absolutely bonkers. It's all very well and good saying you come round to his house. I can completely get that. I can understand why just about understand why you'd kick his garden gate in, I suppose. But I think you know, the idea of like rolling him around in his back garden and kneeling on his back and stuff like that, I mean, it's just a bit. Look, I think it's a bit much, and I would have appreciated it if someone from West Mercia Police would have come forward to actually talk about this.
Yeah, well, let us know where you stand on this issue. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But now let's move on to our top story of the hour. In the wake of the so-called Tory sleaze scandal engulfing Westminster, which led to the resignation of a Conservative Member of Parliament, Owen Paterson, after he was found to have broken lobbying rules, fresh questions have been raised over Torridge and West Devon MP Sir Geoffrey Cox's activities outside Parliament. This is in relation to his legal work in the British Virgin Islands that has earned him over £700,000 on top of his MP salary while he represents his constituency remotely.
Yes, well, Labour has now demanded that Michael Gove comes clean on claims that ministers were threatened with the loss of funding for their constituency if they did not vote to rescue Owen Paterson from suspension last week. The claim was made by one unnamed backbencher to the Financial Times. This comes as Labour themselves comes under the spotlight for their own MPs' earnings.
Yes, well, now it was Liberal Democrat Chief Whip Wendy Chamberlain who called the urgent parliamentary standards debate on Monday. She called the Prime Minister's no-show at the debate utterly unacceptable. Well, we're pleased to be joined by another former Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Vince Cable, who was Business Secretary in the coalition government. Thank you for your time this morning, Sir Vince. You've led a party yourself. You presumably care very much about leadership. What do you make of the Prime Minister's leadership in handling this scandal?
Well, he should have turned up. I mean, it actually puts him in a very bad light. I think one of the lessons we all learn in public life is that sort of running away at a time of exposure doesn't do you any favours. And even if an interview is embarrassing or an appearance in Parliament's embarrassing, it's better to take the flak and deal with it rather than being seen to hide. So he hasn't handled this well, and I think his own backbenchers are going to turn on him soon unless he improves the way he's dealing with this issue.
Yeah, why do we really care about MPs having second jobs? You know, there's something about Gordon Brown raking it in from doing after-dinner speeches and things like that. I mean, there's a difference, isn't there, between, you know, an MP having a job and then using that to lobby government, and I can understand why that would be an issue. But, I mean, MPs have got a right to go and earn money separately, haven't they?
Well, I don't know why you mentioned Gordon Brown. I mean, he didn't do that when he was in office, and most of his work is charitable. I mean, unlike some other
that's what I mean, but people are making an issue of it.
If you're talking about current MPs, no, I think that, you know, the current salary, just over £80,000, expenses covered, is quite generous. I mean, I stepped down from a well-paid job in the private sector to go into Parliament. I accepted that it was a public duty. I wasn't there to make money. I think there's a difference between some MPs, and there have been several who've, say, qualified doctors who've been using their skills in the pandemic. That's a very good use of their time. Others, like the Prime Minister, who earn quite a bit of money writing articles in newspaper and books on political issues. Nothing wrong in principle with that. And others who have been either actively lobbying for particular companies, that was Mr. Patterson's problem, or who are just using Parliament as a part-time job. And that is, I think, unacceptable, and I think the public look very badly on it.
Sleaze is nothing new at all in politics, but I suppose against the backdrop of what we've been going through over the last 18 months with the pandemic, people's trust in politicians and sort of the ruling elites in general is waning quite significantly, and this is perhaps adding fuel to the fire. As a Liberal Democrat yourself, do you consider this country still a liberal and democratic nation, or are we seeing the erosion of those values?
Well, I don't altogether buy this argument that, we're getting worse all the time. I mean, there've been some pretty bad episodes in the past. But no, I think that there has been an erosion of certain things. I mean, I think one of them is the independence of institutions, which are coming under a lot of attack at the moment, whether it's the Standards Commissioner in Parliament or the independent watchdogs of the BBC. Or the courts, political threats to their independence is a very worrying trend. And I think that's the underlying problem we should be worrying about here. But there are a lot of good people in Parliament. I was in Parliament 20 years. Most MPs are very honourable, hard-working people of all parties. There are a few bad apples, and it's very important that we have an independent system to identify them and hold them to account, which is what should have happened in the Patterson case and eventually was.
We've been reporting from COP all week, and indeed last week as well. Our intrepid political correspondent Tom Harwood has been rampaging through Glasgow, left, right and centre. What do you make of what's going on up there? Because I think a lot of people now will be, waking up to the reality of, net zero, the big green agenda, meaning that it's going to really hit them in the wallets. And a lot of people would say, well, hang on a minute, until China actually acts, then there's no point really us doing anything. I understand you quite like China, don't you?
No, I particularly like it. It's the reality of life. It's now becoming the biggest economy in the world, and we're going to have to deal with it. And they're not particularly worse than any other major power. I mean, the United States found it very difficult to pass legislation. Under the Trump administration, they didn't even adhere to the Paris Protocol. I mean, the Chinese do emit vast amounts of greenhouse gases. They're going to have to curb it. They recognize that. They've got the largest renewable industry in the world. But in the current environment of sort of Cold War, which we've now got with China, it's deteriorated very badly in 2 years. There really isn't a scope for the kind of cooperation we're going to have with them. I mean, that's the underlying problem. But picking out the Chinese is particularly clever. There are many other countries that are not compliant. And we're all going to have to be compliant because the situation is deteriorating. I think that's one of the big things that's come out of COP, that even the promises of countries, when you add them together, are not adequate to deal with a minimum requirement to stop very serious climate change.
And very finally, a lot of people in this country will be looking at Labour and the Conservatives at the moment and feeling quite politically homeless. And once upon a time, they used to look to the Liberal Democrats for that. And it doesn't seem that they are anymore. Where do you think the Liberal Democrats have gone wrong? And what do they need to do to maybe provide that political home to the politically homeless?
Well, it's been very difficult for the party to get back after several bad general election results following the coalition. I was there in the middle of that period, and we did very well. We had massively improved local election results. We did very well in the European elections, and then we slipped back again. I mean, the basic problem we have, it's very difficult under the current first-past-the-post system to break through for a third party, whether it's us or the Greens or anybody else. But I think, we've now reached a tipping point where disillusionment with the government is very powerful. I think it's growing. It will manifest itself in future by-elections, probably. The Labour Party has been particularly compelling as an opposition, but that may change. And the Liberal Democrats, I think, will come back. It will come back initially through local government. There will be future by-elections. We'll do well. And I think coming in a general election in a couple of years' time, we'll win a significant number of seats currently Conservative held. So we will come back, but it's not an easy process in the process.
No, absolutely. Well, if Nick Clegg does as good a job at Facebook as he did with the Lib Dems, then no one will use Facebook anymore, I suppose. But thank you very much, Vince. Great to have you on the show. Vince Cable there, former Liberal Democrat lead. Now, after the break, the Senate has voted to extend vaccine passports across Wales to cinemas, theatres and concert halls. Well, our Wales reporter, Lily Hewitson, has more on this in just a few minutes, so don't go anywhere.
Hello, a very good morning to you. It's a bit grey and gloomy in places as we start off this Wednesday. Rain at times for large parts of England and Wales. Brighter but colder weather for Scotland and Northern Ireland. This cold front, well, basically separates things from England and Wales, where it's cloudy and damp, from Scotland and Northern Ireland, where it's brighter but also subject to further blustery showers. The north and west of Scotland in particular, the north coast of Northern Ireland seeing further showers. Sunnier spells for the rest of Northern Ireland, eastern and southern Scotland, as well as, certainly compared to yesterday, Northern England and North Wales. But for the rest of England and Wales, a lot of cloud cover, outbreaks of rain continuing through the morning, on and off into the afternoon, perhaps some brightness there in the far southeast where it will feel pleasant enough with highs of 15 or even 16 Celsius. Further north, colder conditions and also that gusty breeze, perhaps increasing ever so slightly later Wednesday and into Thursday morning as this feature arrives. That will bring some more persistent rain to the far north and northwest of Scotland. Clear spells through this central slice, whilst a lot of cloud remains overnight elsewhere, and further outbreaks of mostly light rain and drizzle, but also fairly extensive fog possible as we wake up on Thursday, particularly towards the southeast, and that fog could cause some issues first thing. But the zone of low cloud, mistiness, will push gradually north during tomorrow morning. It will reach parts of northern England where it will turn increasingly gloomy through the day, whilst it brightens up to the south with some sunshine appearing by the end of the afternoon. Feeling pleasant with highs of 13 or 14 in the south. Fewer showers for Scotland, but thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arrive later for Northern Ireland. And that's the sign of things to come for Friday, where it will turn increasingly unsettled across northern and western parts of the UK. But high pressure returns for this weekend, turning things drier with lighter winds.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Maroki. We're here all the way through until midday with a show full of all of today's biggest stories, top guests and top discussion topics as well.
Yes, and we want to hear from you as usual, so get in touch with us on our email gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll get to those throughout the show. But first, let's give you the latest news with Rosie Wright.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 10 o'clock. A victim of child sexual exploitation is calling for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. Rotherham Council is meeting this afternoon to discuss child sexual exploitation in the town. Opposition Conservatives claim in a report that there are multiple examples of active grooming and child sexual exploitation in Rotherham. The 2014 J report revealed there'd also been 1,500 victims of child sexual exploitation in Rotherham between 1997 and 2013. A survivor who spoke to GB News is demanding action.
It's a despicable behaviour when we're speaking about children being abused, and I think that has come from Councillor Chris Reid and Alan Billings. If they're incapable of protecting the people and the children of this town, they need to do the right thing and walk away.
Wales has announced COVID passes will be required to enter cinemas, theatres and concert halls from Monday. Protesters have been demonstrating against the extended measures. Currently, proof of full vaccination or a negative test result is only needed for nightclubs and large events.
Come to Cardiff today to make my voices heard, to actually have solidarity with people in Wales, to say it's absolutely unacceptable that there should be any vaccine passports. The last vote at the Senate should not have gone through. It was a draw, 28-28. It went through on a technical hitch. Now we're faced with them being extended to different venues across Wales.
Labour has called for a standards investigation into Sir Geoffrey Cox's private work for the British Virgin Islands inquiry. The Conservative MP is accused of misusing his parliamentary office for his second job, where he earned hundreds of thousands of pounds giving legal advice. Deputy Leader Angela Rayner says the actions appear to be a brazen breach of the rules. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries will scrutinise a first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. The paper published this morning urges nations to revisit and strengthen their emissions targets for 2030 so that global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Prime Minister is returning to the conference, which is shifting its focus to transport and low-carbon travel. Poland has sent around 15,000 soldiers to its border with Belarus. The Polish Defence Minister says more migrants attempted to breach the border overnight. Belarus's leader, Alexander Lukashenko, denies claims he's sending people en masse to Europe in revenge for EU sanctions. The bloc says it's close to imposing further sanctions against the country.
You know, we're moving from a situation where we had a sort of hybrid war to a very dangerous situation where, you know, you've got thousands of people potentially moving to the border, and you've got armed border guards on both sides, one trying to push them across and one trying to prevent them from coming over. So it's really a very dangerous situation at the moment on the Polish-Belarusian border. And a spark, a single spark, you know, could really set things off in a very unpleasant way and lead to an even more serious escalation.
The RSPCA has launched an investigation into a video which shows a woman kicking and punching a horse. The charity said it was actively looking into the case, describing the images as upsetting. The primary school teacher, who's reportedly received death threats since the video started to be shared online, has been suspended from her job. Prince Harry claims he warned Twitter it was allowing a coup to be staged a day before the riots at the US Capitol. The Duke of Sussex says he's exchanged emails with the CEO, Jack Dorsey, in the days leading up to the January riots. Well, it comes as federal judge rejected former President Donald Trump's request to block the release of documents to the House committee investigating the incident. A pair of diamond bracelets that belonged to Marie Antoinette have sold at auction for £6.3 million. The sale is several times higher than the estimates of between £1 and £3 million. The bracelets bear the former Queen of France's name, and they're made up of 112 diamonds, silver and gold. You are right up to date here on GB News. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. Right now, back to the point.
Good morning. You're watching To The Point on GB News with Mercy Muroki and me, Patrick Christie's. We've got a show full of all of today's biggest topics and stories and the issues that you really care about. So here's what's coming up.
Yes, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has now confirmed that vaccines will be compulsory for frontline staff in England from April in the NHS, but concerns have been raised as 103,000 staff still remain unjabbed. Given the pre-existing staff shortages, we'll discuss what this policy could mean for healthcare provision.
Yes, and we'll be asking whether or not employers should be allowed to contact their employees outside of work hours. This comes as the Portuguese government has passed a law banning bosses from contacting workers after they've clocked out to help give employees a better work-life balance. Should the UK look to follow suit? Well, let's know what you think about all of that.
Yes, and the migrant crisis row at the border between Belarus and Poland continues to heat up as Poland's Prime Minister accuses Russian President Vladimir Putin of being behind the manufactured migrant crisis at Belarus's border with Poland. We'll bring you the latest on that.
Yes, we have all of that coming up and much, much more across the programme. And you can get in touch with us, as usual, on GBViews at gbnews.uk, and loads of you have been so far. But first, Mercy gives her views on deporting foreign criminals.
When you think of Britain's most resented professions, bailiffs, bankers and of course politicians might spring to mind. But there's a new class of professionals that's giving them a run for their money and fast becoming one of Britain's most disliked: lawyers. Specifically, lawyers who stop deportation flights full of foreign national convicts. Of all the ways in which you could really annoy the British public, surely fighting to keep drug dealers, kidnappers and violent criminals who aren't British citizens in the country really has to be up there. And that's why, undoubtedly, the latest round of ditched deportations will not come as welcome news to many. This morning, it emerged that all but 13 foreign criminals on a deportation flight were removed from the flight last night at the 11th hour after last-ditch appeals from human rights lawyers. Currently, as the law stands, the UK Borders Act of 2007 mandates that the Home Secretary must make a deportation order against a foreign national who's been convicted of an offence and sentenced to at least 12 months, except in exceptional circumstances. A foreign national is somebody who does not have British citizenship, of course, and even for those with dual citizenship, the British government can still strip that if they believe it's conducive to the public good. But the argument's made that it's wrong to deport people who came to this country as children. One man on the flight, for example, who was removed, came to the UK when he was just 3 months old, and he says he's being deported to a country he has no memory of. And I sort of get this. I came to this country when I was 5 years old. I feel British. I am, for all intents and purposes, British. How bizarre would it be to deport me to a country I have little recollection of and haven't lived in for 2 decades? It would feel all a bit, I don't know, BNP-esque. But then again, I don't go around committing grievous bodily harm, selling crack cocaine or kidnapping people and thus getting myself deported. And if I did, well, some might argue I had it coming. Look, it's a very complicated issue. I acknowledge that, and I don't proclaim to have the answers. But I do know this. British people overwhelmingly have little to no appetite for activist lawyers blocking deportations. All the evidence shows we're a tough on crime kind of people. It's just rather unfortunate that that isn't reflected on the actual law of the land. We have laws in this country to keep society sane and civil, and if you break those laws, well, tough. The activists who block the roads, risking it all to constantly trying to stop foreign criminals being deported, might do well to spend that time meeting the families of the victims, many whom undoubtedly suffer life-changing injuries and a lifetime of trauma. And as for the lawyers, they might be able to stop these one-way trips for foreign criminals, but in doing so, they're putting themselves firmly on a one-way trip to being Britain's most hated professionals.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it, really? I do think there's a lot of absolute madness that goes on when we're trying to block deportations. I mean, there was a flight, it's probably going back a couple of years now, that I remember quite well, where, you know, on that plane were actual people who'd been convicted of terror offences, this, that and the other. But there was also a lot of people that we just didn't know about. Their details hadn't been made public. So they could have been anything. They could have been terrorists. They could have been paedophiles. They could have been whoever. We just didn't know. And Amnesty International got on the tarmac and stopped the plane taking off. I interviewed them. I said, you've got no idea who's on this plane, have you? And they're like, no, we don't know. So you could be trying to keep people in this country who want to ruin this country.
Yeah, I think there is this is where there is a grey area for me, because on one hand, of course, the law of the land is if you get convicted of a crime and and you're sentenced to more than 12 months and you're not a British citizen, then you're going to be deported, apart from if you have very exceptional circumstances or if the human rights courts decide that, you know, that would be violating your human rights because you have family, dependents, etc. But I think for me, where there's a grey area is when somebody did come to this country very young, 3 months old, for example. I mean, obviously, that person has absolutely zero recollection. There are people who are, for all intents and purposes, effectively British, who are being deported. And then it sort of does beg the question, well, where do you draw the line? And the government did try to do this, and they had an agreement, really, in principle, with Jamaica, where this deportation flight was going, that they wouldn't be deporting people who came to Britain when they were younger than 12. But the government, they're saying the government's violated that agreement now by doing this deportation flight. So for me, I think it is worth considering whether it's right morally to deport people just because they haven't claimed their British citizenship when they've been here pretty much all their life. I think that's the grey area for me.
Yes, well, it is indeed a very grey area, but yeah, I think it's an issue that's certainly not going away anytime soon. And I do think as well, we seem to be, you know, there's another question as well, isn't there, of when people do commit crimes in this country and we sentence them to prison in this country, why don't we just deport them immediately? Because then the taxpayer has to pay for them, etc., etc., etc. But yes, anyway, keep these views coming in, people. GB Views at GBNews.uk. Lots of you have indeed already been in touch. If the individual criminal who was being removed was brought here when they were months old, they've had years to apply for British citizenship.
Yeah, there's that argument as well. But the government can still strip you. If you have dual citizenship the government has the power to strip you of that, obviously, but it doesn't make you stateless. But
yes.
Yeah.
You did also appeal for views. Do you want to know or do you not want to know about...
About what?
The response to which side the public were on when it came to the man who flashed a police camera.
OK, go on.
It's overwhelmingly in favour of me. Oh, you love to see it. You love to see it. Oh.
So people think they...
No, to be fair, there are a couple of people who... I mean, this guy, Paul, thinks that you're to the right of Attila the Hun. However, he also says that he loves your work. So, you know, you give it and he takes it.
Thank you, Paul. Is it Paul? Yes.
It is Paul, yes.
Thank you.
Yes. No, seriously, there are quite a few people who do agree with you, to be fair. But crucially, the overwhelming majority agree with me. Anyway, no.
So he says, I have no...
No. Look, basically, one of the best ones here was from Kathleen, who basically hits the nail on the head, I think, when she says, I was half right. And this is something we can agree on.
Yeah.
Which is that, if you are just joining us, basically, this chap decided to mooney a police camera because it was on his bucket list. Obviously, it breaks the law. But then it was the police response to that, where they sent 6 officers round, they kicked his garden fence in and pinned him to his back garden, the grass in his back garden, etc. Kathleen makes that point that he shouldn't have broken the law, but the police response was a little bit heavy.
Yeah. I think we can agree on that one, yes. Now, moving on, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has finally announced that it will become mandatory for all frontline NHS staff in England to be fully vaccinated against COVID from April of next year. More than 90% of NHS workers are already fully vaccinated, but about 100,000 still are not, and the government are hoping that they will now get their jabs by April.
Yes, indeed. Well, the call comes after the Daily Telegraph revealed that more than 11,000 people who died from coronavirus in hospital had caught the disease from within the hospital while being treated for an unrelated affliction. Sajid Javid said the move will help protect patients and the NHS as a whole from COVID-19. Well, Tony Hinton is a retired NHS surgeon, over 30. Oh, sorry, I believe we've got a clip first before we go to Tony Hinton. I've jumped the gun. Apologies. Here we go.
We must avoid preventable harm and protect patients in the NHS, protect colleagues in the NHS, and, of course, protect the NHS itself.
Well, Tony Hinton, Dr. Tony Hinton, is a retired NHS surgeon with over 30 years of experience and is with us this morning to talk through this announcement from the Department of Health and Social Care. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Tony. What do you make of this? Because 103,000 roughly people are not yet jabbed. Are those people just supposed to leave the NHS the day after the deadline? I mean, clearly that can't happen.
Well, there's quite a few interesting things that the Health Secretary said yesterday. The first is he claimed that 3 months ago, the number of staff not vaccinated in care homes was 64,000. And by the end of October, it had dropped to 32,000, implying that 32,000 extra had now been vaccinated. But of course, that isn't the case, because many of those have been leaving the care home sector. And strangely enough, many healthcare assistants have been leaving the care home sector and joining the NHS, because at the moment it's not mandatory. And I even know of hospitals where they've taken on extra staff from care homes, but then the NHS has seconded some of their own staff that are vaccinated back to the care homes, so they remain staff, so the hospital can actually discharge their patients. There's really very little logic to this. He also talked about two exceptions. And the exceptions to staff getting the jabs were, first of all, that if they didn't have face-to-face contact with patients. And I was speaking to a GP colleague last night who said that would just make the situation in NHS general practice much worse, because there will be some GPs that do not want to take this vaccine. And it's interesting, isn't it, to think these are people that know about medicine, they know how to read research papers, and they've made a conscious decision.
Yeah, but how are the public supposed to view that then? How are the public supposed to view that? Because, one way of looking at it is, well, hang on a minute, if this person who is medically trained, medically qualified, does know how to read research papers, and they've come to their own conclusion that they're not going to have this vaccine, well, a lot of the members of the British public might be thinking, well, there's something going on here, I don't want it either.
Well, it certainly raises questions, and there was also this suggestion the other day that there were 14 times more patients coming into hospital now than last year by the head of the NHS, and that's all been debunked, because in fact she was referring to a time in August. But actually, if you look at last summer, if you look at, say, July, August, September, and this summer, July, August, September, there were far more admissions to hospital this summer, about 10 times more, than last summer, COVID admissions. And you have to say, well, what was the difference between those 2 years? Well, the only difference was that in 2020 we didn't have vaccines, and in 2021 we did, but it didn't seem to stop patients going to hospital. And I looked back at the original Pfizer data from their first look at the vaccine and whether it worked or not. And the only claim Pfizer have ever made is that the vaccine reduces symptoms. They've never claimed it reduced transmission or infection or hospitalisation or death. The only claim they made was it reduced symptoms. That was all. So
but the
I don't know whether they're
evidence does
also...
show, doesn't it, Dr. Hinton, that the Public Health England evidence does show it reduces household transmission, or people who've had two jabs are more likely to see household transmission. And they're also, of course, more likely to get a severe version of the disease, which means they're less likely to be taking, to be using the NHS and might recover at home. So there certainly is a benefit to having the virus in terms of transmission, isn't there? To having the vaccine, not the virus.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I don't think there's a lot of evidence that it reduces either your chance of catching it or transmitting it. Maybe a tiny bit. But there's also evidence that the amount of vaccine, the amount of virus that a person produces, the viral load, if they catch COVID, is the same whether they were vaccinated or not. There was an interesting study from Cambridge, came out 2 or 3 days ago, and that was looking at people catching it in hospital. And actually what they found was patients were not catching it from staff. Patients were catching it from other patients. And part of my worry about this agenda that the health sector and the government are on is they're trying to blame staff for the problems that politicians have caused. Hospitals at the moment are not full of COVID patients. They're full of patients that should have been treated months and months ago and are now more complex. They're also filling up with patients that can't be discharged to care homes. That's why hospitals are struggling, not because of COVID at the moment.
Well, Doctor, thank you very, very much. It's a really interesting insight, that, I think, into just the mindset, really, as well, of a lot of people in the medical community, and some interesting facts there about, as well, about the way that it's been transmitted. I think it's more seems like a piece of mind for people. Thank you very much, Dr. Tony Hinter, by the way. Sorry, thank you. But yeah, it's more of a peace of mind for people, I think. I get emails quite regularly here saying, would you want your elderly relative to be treated by someone who was unvaccinated? Well, I'm not sure how much of a difference that really makes. I think if it would, lower less of the symptoms, this, that, and the other, but it doesn't seem like it's going to make it less likely that they could actually pass COVID on to them. It just depends on the strength of it, as it were, or
Yeah, I suppose it does, but I mean, there is evidence to show it does reduce transmission. So, I mean, there's lots of evidence to show lots of things, but that to me is the key point. I know that it doesn't. Dr. Hinton said that it doesn't reduce your chance of catching COVID. Okay, that's fine, but the point here is a doctor who's vaccinated or double jabbed more or less likely to pass on COVID to your vulnerable relative or yourself if you're in hospital? And if there is, there is an increased chance, then surely that's the point. There is a lower chance of transmitting. Then I think that's the only point that matters, really.
Well, get in touch. GBViews, gbnews.uk. There's definitely a range of views on this particular topic. Well, after the break, we'll be talking to employment lawyer Gillian Howard about Portugal's decision to ban bosses contacting workers out of hours. What do you think of this? Is overtime wreaking havoc with your work-life balance? Let us know. But first, here's the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. It's a bit grey and gloomy in places as we start off this Wednesday. Rain at times for large parts of England and Wales. Brighter but colder weather for Scotland and Northern Ireland. This cold front, well, basically separates things from England and Wales, where it's cloudy and damp, from Scotland and Northern Ireland, where it's brighter but also subject to further blustery showers. The north and west of Scotland in particular, the north coast of Northern Ireland seeing further showers. Sunnier spells for the rest of Northern Ireland, eastern and southern Scotland, as well as, certainly compared to yesterday, Northern England and North Wales. But for the rest of England and Wales, a lot of cloud cover, outbreaks of rain continuing through the morning, on and off into the afternoon, perhaps some brightness there in the far southeast where it will feel pleasant enough with highs of 15 or even 16 Celsius. Further north, colder conditions and also that gusty breeze, perhaps increasing ever so slightly later Wednesday and into Thursday morning as this feature arrives. That will bring some more persistent rain to the far north and northwest of Scotland. Clear spells through this central slice, whilst a lot of cloud remains overnight elsewhere, and further outbreaks of mostly light rain and drizzle, but also fairly extensive fog possible as we wake up on Thursday, particularly towards the southeast, and that fog could cause some issues first thing. But the zone of low cloud, mistiness, will push gradually north during tomorrow morning. It will reach parts of northern England where it will turn increasingly gloomy through the day, whilst it brightens up to the south with some sunshine appearing by the end of the afternoon. Feeling pleasant with highs of 13 or 14 in the south. Fewer showers for Scotland, but thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain arrive later for Northern Ireland. And that's a sign of things to come for Friday, where it will turn increasingly unsettled across northern and western parts of the UK. But high pressure returns for this weekend, turning things drier with lighter winds.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everybody. Now, in Portugal, it will soon be illegal for companies to contact their staff outside their contracted working hours. So if they do, they could actually face financial penalties. In addition to this, employers must contribute to the extra expenses incurred during the course of working from home, like higher electricity bills and gas bills.
Yes, France has implemented the right to disconnect law since 2017, preventing action being taken against employees who don't reply when out of hours. Well, today we will be asking whether or not employers should be allowed to contact their employees outside of work hours.
Yes, well, let's talk to employment lawyer and consultant with Leighton's law firm, Gillian Howard. Thank you very much, Gillian. What's your take on this? And do you think it could actually end up being illegal for people in this country, employers in this country, to contact their staff outside working hours?
Well, good morning, Patrick and Mercy. It already is, in a sense. Firstly, we've had the Working Time Directive, which is now the Working Time Regulations, which limit the number of hours, with exceptions, but limit the number of hours employees are allowed to work. And that is 48 hours maximum, averaged over a 17-hour period, 17-week period. But actually in the UK, hours of work are mainly determined and regulated in the individual's contract of employment or in collective agreements that employers have agreed with trade unions. And I think you have to distinguish between junior staff and very senior staff. Junior staff normally have their set working hours set out in their contract, and so they would not be legally obliged to answer calls or respond to work demands outside those working hours. They could ignore them, and if an employer attempted to discipline them or dismiss them or detrimentally affect them in any way, that would be unlawful, and it would be a breach of contract as well. As far as senior staff are concerned, they are normally under a term in their contract to devote their whole time and attention to their work. And so an employer could quite lawfully, as they do, request them or require them to answer calls, answer emails, do work outside working hours. But then employers have got to consider this. The law has now recognised that women are the primary child carers. So if a woman is required or requested to work outside her normal working hours, and she is a primary child carer, that would be indirect sex discrimination, and any detriment applied to her would be unlawful sex discrimination. The same principle applies to anyone with a disability whose doctor has advised them not to do long hours and to curtail their working hours. So if their employer required anyone with a mental or physical impairment, which is regarded as a disability under the Equality Act, and they were required to work longer hours or answer calls or answer emails, then again, the employer would be breaching the Equality Act. They too could be successfully sued. So the long answer to your question is no, it wouldn't work in the UK.
Gillian, you've given such a comprehensive answer there. Thank you so much for giving us the ins and outs of what people are entitled to. I mean, obviously this has happened in Portugal. It's Gillian, thank you, Gillian. We're saying that it's sort of effectively in place here because of the Working Times Directive, not legally enforced. But I think some people might say, you know, people who do the best or who excel in business are the ones who do put in those extra hours, and then it might.
Well, there's ways of doing it. It depends on your industry. I mean, I did have a boss once where I had to go have a word with him because it was absolutely relentless. You know, and my phone would be pinging at like 11 p.m. at night with 15 different messages. First thing Sunday morning, this, you know. I had to say, look, I'm mentally, it's destroying me. But then there's other places where I've worked. You know, you don't mind, especially in our industry. You know, if there's a bit of breaking news, sometimes you've got to just go and do it, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. Well, let us know what you think. Would you like your bots to be banned from texting you after hours? Let us know, gbvs@gbnews.uk. But now, Poland's Prime Minister has accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of being behind the manufactured migrant crisis at Belarus's border with Poland. At least 2,000 migrants are stuck at the border in freezing conditions after being led there by Belarusian soldiers, but being refused entry into Poland by Polish guards. Many more, some predict thousands, are expected to arrive in the coming days.
Well, many are young men, but there are also women and children, apparently, largely from the Middle East and Asia. Migrants have described how Belarusian authorities seized their phones and pushed them towards the border fence. Well, Poland PM Mateusz Morawiecki, whose name I've just absolutely butchered, I'm afraid, said that while Belarus's authoritarian leader Lukashenko is orchestrating the crisis, which he termed an attack, the mastermind behind the crisis was actually President Putin.
Well, journalist and political commentator George Brzezinski joins us now to talk about this. What do you make of what's happening at the moment? This is quite a dire situation for the migrants, some of whom have actually died as a result of freezing temperatures.
Yes, good morning. This is an example of modern hybrid warfare. We are in the 21st century. We have videos, and thanks to those videos, we can see that the Belarusian soldiers are involved in leading the migrants to the physical border. The migrants are shouting, "Germany, Germany." That's where they want to get. It's scary, to be honest, because there have been people that already died. There may be more people that could die in the freezing woods. It's December coming soon. It is very dangerous. German Interior Minister praised Poland for defending EU's borders against this illegal immigration, which is very different to what we've heard in 2015, where there was a clear message that all refugees are welcome. But I think this situation is more blatant, and we can see that it's state-supported.
Well, it certainly does look that way. I mean, this is going to have quite a big knock-on effect, you would have thought, for Polish and Belarusian relations, isn't it?
Absolutely. It is unfortunate. I would, of course, hope for Poland to have the best possible relations with our neighbors, with Belarus, but there is something else here at stake. It is some sort of a provocation. I do not know what the long-term goal is. Perhaps one of the reasons could be that they want Poland to be conflicted with the EU, that Poland is somehow mismanaging the border, maybe not caring enough about those innocent, some of them innocent people that are stranded there and cannot even go back to their countries. So I know that Poland has already contacted a lot of the countries where the refugees, where the migrants come from, such as Iraq, and 2 consulates, Belarusian consulates, were closed because they were just handing out visas in Baghdad and Kabul to everybody that asked for it. And I also know that van der Leyen sent her deputy to a number of countries to also speak and disallow this illegal procedure of just handing out all visas to an X amount of people. And there are huge numbers potentially coming in the recent weeks. I do hope that the Lukashenko's regime will understand that sending so many migrants that may be dying is a double-edged sword and will not make him look good in the international world.
Well, yes.
Indeed. Well, George, thank you for joining us this morning and explaining that for us. George Brzezinski there, talking about Belarusian and Polish relations at the moment in the face of this migrant, some would say manufactured migrant crisis, so developing situation there.
Well, from one crisis to another, after the break, we will look at the cladding crisis as Housing Secretary Michael Gove questions whether people should pay for unsafe cladding to be replaced. But before that, let's have a look at this morning's news.
I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. A survivor of child sexual exploitation is calling for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. Well, it comes after GB News revealed that up to 1,600 children may have been at the risk of grooming in the borough since 2017. Labour has called for a standards investigation into Sir Geoffrey Cox's private work for the British Virgin Islands. The Conservative MP is accused of misusing his parliamentary office for his second job, where he earned hundreds of thousands of pounds giving out legal advice. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner says the actions appear to be a brazen breach of the rules. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries will scrutinise a first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. The paper published this morning urges nations to revisit and strengthen their emissions targets for 2030 so that global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Wales has announced COVID passes will be required to enter cinemas, theatres and concert halls from Monday. Protesters have been demonstrating against the extended measures. Currently, proof of full vaccination or a negative test result is only needed for nightclubs and large events. Prince Harry claims he warned Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey that his site was allowing a coup to be staged a day before the January riots at the US Capitol. It comes as a federal judge rejected former President Donald Trump's request to block the release of the documents to the House committee investigating the incident. You are up to date. I'll have more on today's top stories for you in half an hour's time.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, ahead of Transport Day today at the COP26 climate conference, the UK has announced that all new road vehicles in the country will be set to zero emissions by 2040. The government also unveiled a concept for a network of electric vehicle charging points across the country.
Well, Volkswagen Group, the parent company of Audi UK, has joined forces with major energy companies to expand the network of fast chargers and invested over £330 million into the project, apparently.
Yes, well, Johnny Byrne is a product specialist at car manufacturer Audi and joins us now to discuss this. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Give us an idea of what this project might mean for the average person who will be forced to buy an electric vehicle at some point over the next couple of decades. What will it mean for them? Will they be able to charge their cars faster? Will there be more charging points across the UK? Give us an idea.
Yeah, good morning, guys. Yeah, we are investing massively into electric vehicles and the electric charging infrastructure. I think in the UK alone, there are about 24,000 charging points. For some context, there are fewer than 9,000 petrol stations. So already we are above where we're at with fuel stations. But the government has invested 1.3 billion to the project as well by 2030. It estimates we need around between 280 and 480,000 charging points. So that's at least 10 times the current number we have. So there's a long way to go. There's a lot of change that needs to happen, but we're on the right tracks, and we will get there with the backing that we have.
Yeah, how much do we think that a lot of these electric cars that you're going to be making in the near future, how much are these going to set people back, do you reckon?
Yeah, it's one of the many sort of myths and misconceptions around electric vehicles. I think when a new technology is first introduced, whether that's cars or smartphones or games consoles, they often command a higher premium. But electric cars have been around for longer than people may think, and Audi has had them in showrooms since 2018. So an electric SUV that we have costs somewhere around £41,000. If you were to go for a petrol or diesel equivalent, it's about £45,000. So there's already an immediate cost saving when it comes to the purchase price. And that's before you even take into consideration the running costs, because electric cars, they don't have an engine or a transmission. They are far simpler and therefore cheaper to run and repair. On average, if you take the average UK mileage into consideration, the average customer can save between £3,000 and £4,000 just on fuel alone per year.
Yeah, that's quite a lot. And what about one thing about electric cars? I mean, firstly, there's the cost, as you just mentioned. Some people can't actually afford them. They only have £1 or £2 to spend on a car. But it's the time it takes to actually charge them up. Now, give us an idea of what that currently is and what people can expect to see in terms of charging times in the future.
Yeah, the charging is one of the many sort of reservations people have about electric vehicles, but it is often misplaced. There are incredibly high-powered chargers that the Volkswagen Group is investing in, €400 million, that can fully recharge electric vehicle in about 30 to 35 minutes, so incredibly quickly. If you're to charge it overnight at home, it can take 7 to 8 hours, but it's kind of like a smartphone. When the smartphones were first introduced and people realized, well, you have to charge these things every night. It's like that with an electric car, but you don't need to charge them every day. It's just not necessary. So when these cars kind of fit into people's lifestyles and they work around how they can recharge them, it becomes very, very easy to live with and manage.
Thank you very much. Johnny Byrne there is a product specialist at car manufacturer Audi UK, because of course today is Transport Day. Car, woo, absolutely, yeah, like Glastonbury for environmentalist. Yeah. Secretary of State for Housing Michael Gove has paused plans to make leaseholders pay to remove dangerous cladding from their buildings after questioning why cladding victims have had to pay for it at all. The current Building Safety Fund allows leaseholders in buildings over 18 metres high to apply for government funding to cover the costs of repairing dangerous cladding.
Yes, however, the £5 billion pot is estimated to not be enough and also does not provide any financial support to those in smaller complexes, while Michael Gove told MPs yesterday he would review the fund. He's also admitted the government failed the survivors of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, in which 72 people died after fires spreading through combustible cladding engulfed the tower block in London. By leaving people living in similar at-risk buildings, Michael Gove has said that the government is failing people.
Yes, well, Giles Grover is the co-leader of End Our Cladding Scandal, which is a campaign group founded after the Grenfell disaster of 2017. They're calling on the government to lead an urgent national effort to fix the spiralling cladding and building safety crisis. We're also joined by Darren Matthews, who's a property investor who's being forced to pay out over double his investment to replace unsafe cladding. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Oh, which one's that? Sorry, I don't know. Okay, all right, okay. So it'd be nice if someone in my ear could just tell me exactly who this person was, actually. Giles, right, thank you very much. Sorry about that, Giles. I've never met you before in my life, so there we are. Look, just talk me through your experience and what you actually want from the government.
We very simply want protection in law that we shouldn't have to pay the costs of what is essentially a failure of the industry, failure of the government and the state to regulate over 20, 30 years, and the industry to essentially get away with malpractice. It's just simply completely unfair that we have to pay for it, so we need protection.
So how do you feel about the government, what the government's response has been so far? I mean, presumably you welcome Michael Gove's comments. It seems to be a move in the right direction for you, but what do you make of how they've reacted so far?
it's a small step in the right direction. It's positive. We've kind of been here before with warm words from secretaries of state that haven't necessarily led to the action that we need. We do feel that Mr. Gove has been very open and constructive in the dialogue that we've had with him, but we do need some actions and solutions quite quickly, because it has been 4.5 years since the Grenfell tragedy. And if I could just correct one point that you made in the opening statement, it's not that we've been paused paying for the cladding bills. They paused what their attempt was at a solution for 11 metres to 18 metres buildings, the loan scheme. We're still having to pay for remediation, interim measures costs, building insurance. So bills are still landing until we see action from the government.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of people in Manchester, which is near my neck of the woods originally, who are in a similar situation where they bought flats, and then what happens is, it turns out that they've got this cladding on the outside of it. They then got to pay to get that removed. They can't pay. They can't sell it in the meantime, certainly. So, what was supposedly a step up the property ladder, as it were, just actually turns out to be a bit of a greasy pole all the way back down to the bottom, doesn't it? And this is happening up and down the country, I believe.
Yeah, it's all over the country. It's in England, Wales, Scotland. Obviously, they're dealing with it slightly differently in Scotland, where they've got a bit more of a coordinated approach for it. But in all the city centres, it's happening. But it's also happening in a lot of other buildings, the smaller rise buildings in further afield constituencies. So the point is, as well, as you said, it's the first rung of the property ladder. A lot of people who've been supported by government-backed schemes such as Help to Buy to actually get on the property ladder, they're finding that their flats are now valued at zero. So we wrote to the Chancellor about a year ago to say really needs to get a grip of it, take control, do whatever it takes to resolve it. And we're already seeing the impact to the wider housing market as well. So until they have a proper long-term solution, the uncertainty, the limbo will just continue.
But what I can't understand, Giles, is that right now there are so many people living in essentially like a tinderbox, aren't they? They know that if this goes up, what happened at Grenfell will happen again. And the government knows that, and the government is content now to allow this to happen. You would have thought that this would have been, what would it have to take for the government to address this issue? And because if it does happen again, and another 50, 60, however many people die as a result of it, the government won't be able to say anymore, oh gosh, we didn't really realise that this cladding existed, or we didn't realise it was this flammable, because they know it now. And this incident happened in 2017. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like you can't quite understand why the government are able to sleep at night, essentially, with this going on?
Yeah, I wouldn't really disagree with any of that. I think that Boris Johnson has seen it when he, quite soon after he became, I think, leader or prime minister at the Cube in Bolton, where there was a fire that spread within minutes. So there has been some action. But again, we started off as End Our Cladding Scandal 2 or 3 years ago. We said all along as well since our relaunch over the last year and a half, it's not just cladding, which the government knows, but they've generally focused on kind of the media management of it rather than thinking, OK, we just need to sit down, start again and just say, what do we need to finally bring an end to this crisis? Whether that's risk prioritisation, whether that's funding, whether that's just a whole approach where it's not left up to the industry to resolve it. So that's the worry that we have, that we've already seen a number of near misses. In London, there was one a few months ago. We just need them to get on with it and properly take it seriously. Otherwise, as the Grenfell survivors have said, Grenfell 2 could well be in the post.
Well, Giles, thanks for that. We're actually now joined by Darren Matthews as well on the screen. There are property investors who's actually been forced to pay out of his own pocket over double his investment to replace his unsafe cladding. Thanks for joining us. Tell us what you feel about all of this, and do you welcome Michael Gove's comments?
Good morning. Yeah, I very much welcome Michael Gove's statements that he made before the committee the other day, but I'm slightly cautious in any effect that it might have. Is his words going to be put into action? Are we going to see some solution, some resolution, whereby us as leaseholders don't have to make any payment? In real terms, leaseholders are the only innocent party in this. It should be that the government will take some action in a similar way that Ted Baillieu, when he was the Premier of Victoria State in Australia, he took action whereby developers and freeholders were held accountable and responsible for any costings of works, and the leaseholders weren't pursued. So, although I'm quietly cautious in that Mr. Gove is making steps forward. Given past history of the Conservatives government, we're not sure whether they are just empty words at the moment, and I would hope that they're not.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And do you think it's now almost become a two-tier system? I mean, you've had to pay out of your own pocket for this, but there will be lots of people who cannot physically afford to, at the moment, do that. It seems really unfair for those people who can't afford it to sort of be forced to live in what is unsafe housing, essentially, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, it's unfortunate that the government have implemented this two-tier system where properties over 18 metres may be able to claim some funding under the Building Safety Fund. It's unfortunate that I'm in a development that is less than 18 metres. We're 13.5 metres. The government are pursuing alternatives. My freeholder is adamant that I should be responsible for payment. We're not covered under the Building Safety Fund. We've been told that a loan may be an option. We know that Mr Gove is pausing that for the moment. It's just a very, very unfair situation that we're finding ourselves in now, and it's affecting many thousands of people.
Very much. Darren Matthews there, of course, the property developer who's been hit with this, actually. He's been caught on the wrong side of it as well. And Giles Grover as well, who's the co-leader of End Our Cladding Scandal. It just seemed very, very bizarre to me that these people can fall through the cracks. You know, you buy a property or you leasehold it, whatever, you know, and you've not had any say whatsoever in the development of it. You've not had any say in the materials that have been used. You trusted it's passed all the relevant safety checks, and then you're the one who gets landed with the bill. Yeah, it does seem incredibly unfair, and let's just hope Michael Gove does do something about it, and it's not just empty words. But let's move on to something that took place yesterday. The Israeli ambassador to the UK was evacuated under heavy security from an event at the London School of Economics as a result of a large protest by pro-Palestinian activists against her presence. The event last night drew widespread opposition from pro-Palestinian and other groups on campus for platforming racism. That's what they accused the university of, with protesters preventing Zippy Hotovely from taking part. And I believe we can actually show you, before we get to our guest, the footage there of that. So that's the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the UK, just having to be evacuated, as you can see, and actually put in a car, heavy security. After that protest, obviously having to very swiftly, as you can see that there's quite an urgency there to get her away from the scene. Clearly, they were quite afraid for her security there. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely disgraceful, isn't it, really? You know, these people can behave like this, really. It's all one thing having strong views and one thing wanting to demonstrate them, but I think when an ambassador, you know, has to basically leg it under heavy security, there's something going quite badly wrong there. But Isabel Sawkins, research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, joins us now, as I understand it, to comment on this. Thank you very much. What's your initial thoughts about that, then? We've just seen the video there, haven't we? What's your take?
It's horrendous. It's disgusting. It's completely intolerable on so many levels that somebody who came to a university event, she was invited to speak. And then, as you said, you've seen the footage, she had to be hurried out under threats, not only to her own safety, but there was shouting, there was screaming. It's absolutely disgusting. And more than anything, yesterday, as I'm sure you're aware, was the 83rd anniversary of Kristallnacht, which happened during the Nazi era, which was when Jews were basically targeted on the streets, their houses and their shops, they were looted. 83 years later, we are still seeing similar persecution of Jews happening. And it's absolutely outrageous on every level.
I think this is allowed to happen. I mean, this is a university campus. It should be a place of open debate and, you know, it should be upholding freedom of speech. Why do you think things like this are still happening on our university campuses?
This is the thing, you're so right. University should be the type of place where people can have discussions. We shouldn't be non-platforming people. And there's a way to protest these things in a peaceful way. Unfortunately, these things are happening because we are living in a time of rampant anti-Semitism. Particularly, we're seeing it on the left, as we saw last night. And there's a tolerance of it. There's an over-tolerance, and we allow these things to happen in society. The police need to be going after these individuals. They need to be holding them accountable for the horrendous actions last night. Because the problem is, if the police don't do anything, people are going to feel emboldened. They're going to think that they can get away with this type of behaviour, and it's just not acceptable.
No, it's not acceptable, but it's unfortunately not the first time at all, by any stretch of the imagination, actually, that we've seen a bit of police in action. Although, from what I can tell, though, the police did look like there was at least some physical presence. But yeah, I mean, there was a time recently, wasn't there, when a Jewish man was abused in the street. I believe it was in Golders Green, and it kick-started a lot more hate crimes, basically. And the police, there were videos of police walking next to pro-Palestinian, I suppose, demonstrators, you could say, whilst they were saying deeply anti-Semitic things, whilst they were making threats to kill, actually, and the police didn't seem to do anything about that. Do you think that it is one form of racism that's deemed to be more tolerable than other forms of racism?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you think back to May, when everything was kicking off with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we saw horrendous actions on the streets of London. We saw convoys of cars shouting abuse at people, threatening just horrendous things to Jewish individuals and their families. And as you said, the police just don't do enough. And I think so much of it comes down to the fact that anti-Semitism is just not seen on the same... There's a hierarchy of racism that exists. And anti-Semitism is not seen to be as important as other types of prejudice that exist in society. And so this is part of the problem. Time and time again, these awful actions happen. I mean, there was abuse of a Jewish man on a flight, on a Ryanair flight, only just a few days ago from football supporters. Things are starting to be done. A few people have been arrested, but it's not enough to do, just to react to it. Yeah. There needs to be something stronger in society, stopping these incidents from even beginning to take place.
OK. Isabel, thank you so much. Isabel Sawkins, our research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, reacting to those really shocking images and footage, indeed, of the Israeli ambassador having to be hurried out of an event at LSE last night and under with massive security. But anyway, keep all your thoughts coming in to us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more on today's top stories after the break.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning. You're watching To The Point on GB News. With me, Mercy Moroki and Patrick Christie's, we're here for another hour with you with the day's stories and lots of opinion from us and others as usual.
Absolutely, and we'll be going to our inbox in just a moment, gbviews@gbnews.uk to get in touch. But before that, here's the latest news with Rosie.
I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 11 o'clock. A survivor of child sexual exploitation is calling for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. It comes after GB News revealed up to 1,600 children may have been at risk of grooming in the borough since 2017. The Crime Commissioner, Alan Billings, has criticised a report on child sex abuse, which is being discussed by the Council this afternoon.
It's an extraordinary document. It's very vague. It's full of untruths, I have to say. And also, they don't seem to know anything about what's going on in their own borough, in Rotherham, what the police are doing, what the social services are doing, what the National Crime Agency is doing. So I'm just amazed that anyone should be taking this seriously. It's a serious matter, but this is not a serious document.
Dr Billings has also said he'd invited the survivor to meet police teams working on child sexual exploitation to help them better understand grooming. The leader of Rotherham Council, Chris Reid, says he has the deepest of respect for the survivor. Now, from Monday, people in Wales will need to show a COVID pass to go to cinemas, theatre and concert halls. Protesters have been demonstrating against the extended measures. Currently in Wales, you need full proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test to get into nightclubs and large events.
Come to Cardiff today to make my voices heard, to actually have solidarity with people in Wales, to say it's absolutely unacceptable that there should be any vaccine passports. The last vote at the Senate should not have gone through. It was a draw, 28-28. It went through on a technical hitch. Now we're faced with them being extended to different venues across Wales.
Labour has called for a standards investigation into Sir Geoffrey Cox's private work for the British Virgin Islands inquiry. The Conservative MP is accused of misusing his parliamentary office for his second job, where he earned hundreds of thousands of pounds giving legal advice. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner says the actions appear to be a brazen breach of the rules. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries will scrutinise the first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. The paper, published this morning, urges nations to revisit and strengthen their emissions targets for 2030, so that global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Prime Minister is returning to the conference, which is shifting its focus today to transport and low-carbon travel. Poland has sent around 15,000 soldiers to its border with Belarus. The Polish Defence Minister says more migrants attempted to breach the border overnight. Belarus's leader, Alexander Lukashenko, denies claims he's sending people en masse to Europe in revenge for EU sanctions. The bloc says it's close to imposing further sanctions against the country. The RSPCA has launched an investigation into a video which shows a woman kicking and punching a horse. The charity said it was actively looking into the case, describing the images there as upsetting. The primary school teacher, who's reportedly now received death threats since the video was shared online, has been suspended from her job. Medical experts are calling for military-grade first aid kits to be installed in venues like football stadiums and train stations, with the aim of helping to save lives in stabbings and terrorist attacks. St John Ambulance, UK Counter-Terrorism Police and a group of doctors say public access trauma kits need to be installed in key locations. Dr Lynn Thomas, the medical director of St John Ambulance, told GB News there currently isn't any first aid kits like this in the UK.
There is no consistent way that the public would know what to do or have any access to equipment to look after somebody who'd been involved in trauma. Trauma can be anything. It might be a road traffic accident, it might be, unfortunately, a stabbing or a terrorist attack, but it's just so that the public will know what is available for them to be able to help somebody that's in front of them. And that's what we all want to do. We all want to be able to help somebody, but we need to be able to people to have the equipment to do it.
A pair of diamond bracelets that belong to Marie Antoinette have sold at auction for over £6 million. The sale is several times higher than the original estimates of between £1 to £3 million. The bracelets bear the former Queen of France's name, and they're made up of 112 diamonds, silver and gold. You are up to date. I'll be back with the latest headlines in half an hour. For now, back to The Point.
Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We've got a show full of today's big stories and lots of discussions on the issues you care about over the next hour. So here's what's on the menu.
Yes, well, Shamima Begum, who left the country as a teen to join ISIS and has since been stripped of British citizenship, is back in the headlines after her husband has spoken out to condemn ISIS attacks on Europe, but has stated that he still believes the group will, quote, rise again.
Very worrying
Sounds like
stuff.
a lovely chap.
Yes, and after a particularly tense week in Parliament over second jobs and MPs making thousands of pounds on the side, Labour has set its sights on Sir Geoffrey Cox, calling for a standards investigation into his work for the British Virgin Islands. We'll have more on that very shortly.
Now, also on the show, public trauma first aid kits are being unveiled today to increase survival rates in terror attacks and serious stabbings. Campaigners are calling for these military-grade kits to be installed in large public venues like at football stadiums.
Yes, we have all of that coming up in the next hour, and you can get in touch as usual on GB Views at gbnews.uk.
Well, let's first just give you an update on a developing situation in the channels. There is another significant wave of small boats coming across the English Channel today. Around 10 boats have been intercepted so far. We believe that it was about 500 yesterday as well. People, that is, not boats. Our home security editor, Mark White, joins us now. Mark, just run us through exactly what's going on, please.
Well, it is, as you say, another significant wave of small boats coming across the channel this morning. In addition to the 10 that have been intercepted so far, there are reports of other boats out in the channel, and we have the Border Force vessels and the Royal National Lifeboat Institute, the lifeboats, responding to this as well. It follows the interception of about 500 on this side of the channel. Others got into difficulty on the French side of the channel and had to be rescued by French authorities. We also had the death of another migrant reported this week in the channel as well. The conditions, even on what is a relatively calm day for this type of time of year, are not good. Now, I think we can take a look at some of the pictures that have come in this morning. It is utterly astonishing to believe that, to see that we are getting boat after boat still coming across the channel. And of course, we're told that there are thousands of people in the northwest of France, along the coast there, in areas like Dunkirk, Calais, Boulogne, all waiting to get the people smugglers, to get them on boats and across the channel. This is the border, that was the Border Force vessel Hunter. You can see in amongst those going up the gangway there, some children. There were quite a few women and children today. This happens from time to time. You will get a cluster of women and children. We've got to say that the vast majority who are coming across are young men, up in the high 80 percentile of those coming across are young men. Here, another Border Force cutter full there of migrants. They will have been taken off several boats in the channel. Basically, the bigger ship, the cutter, goes out and it meets up with these small boats, takes them off, deploys its own rigid inflatable boat, takes the people off onto that, takes them onto the cutter. When they've gathered enough, clearly when they're bulging at the seams as they are there, then they come back into Dover with them. Our cameraman down there in Dover is reporting that about 40 on each boat today is the number that he's seeing. So that is a very significant number of people out in the channel. So we're 500 yesterday. We could easily top that today by the looks of things.
And we know that the rate of that people have been coming over here across the channel has been more than double what it was last year. Just give us an idea of where we are at now in terms of numbers relatively.
Yeah, well, just over 8,400 came across last year, which was a record year and of great concern. And we had the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, vowing to make this route unviable and to stop the people traffickers. Well, this year, it hasn't just doubled. We're now approaching triple the number of vessels that came across and people that came across. We're about 22,000, over 22,000 now. And with today's figure, as I say, it just keeps climbing. And the real concern is we are heading into the winter months. It is in the Channel, even on calm days like this, it's treacherous. There are winds, there are strong tides, and it's one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. We've seen people losing their lives. Again, this week, another migrant drowned in the Channel. So there is real concern that it may only be a matter of time before we have a very significant tragedy unfolding in the Channel.
Yeah, absolutely. And just while we've got you, the ongoing situation in Belarus, the border with Poland, we covered it a little bit earlier on. And do you think this is a knock-on effect from that? Are we likely to see people coming through that route? And what is the latest there?
Well, there is no doubt, Patrick, that a proportion of those that come into Europe through whatever route, coming up through southern Europe, coming through Eastern Europe, through Belarus and into Poland, Lithuania and Latvia, will find their way to northwest France with a view to trying to get to the UK. Now, many of them are going to Germany, and they've been chanting that they want to go to Germany. But we know from history that those that have gone to, say, Germany, or said they want to go to Germany, will still come up with a view to either getting to France or to getting eventually to the UK. So what's happening, it's a long way away, of course, on the border of Poland and Belarus and on the border of Lithuania and Belarus at the moment. But it has ramifications for us as well, let alone the human misery that is unfolding there as well, because these people are trapped effectively in no man's land. They're not being allowed back into, even though they were hoodwinked by the dictator Alexander Lukashenko into coming to Belarus as an easy route into the European Union. The Poles and the Lithuanians have said, no more, we've had enough, we're bolstering our borders, we're not letting you through. But the Belarusian authorities are not letting them back into Belarus either. So they're stuck and getting increasingly desperate. We saw some really quite violent scenes unfolding on Monday. It was a bit quieter yesterday. We don't know what's going to happen today.
No, we don't indeed. Well, Mark, thank you very much. Fantastic summary of what's been going on, obviously, in the Channel and in the border as well with Belarus. I mean, it's not an issue that's going away anytime soon, that's for sure. Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security correspondent. Editor, even. Sorry, I've demoted you.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Now, more and more revelations are being revealed about MPs' side hustles from secondary jobs. David Lammy is the latest MP to come under fire, as it was revealed. He has pocketed just shy of £150,000 over 3 years, which seems very, very modest, actually, I would say, compared to what some of the others have been raking in. I think something like 10 out of the 12 top ones were Tory MPs. But anyway, while sources of his second salary are varied, his biggest payout came from his once-a-week LBC show, which pulls in more than 40 grand, and all this comes just days after it emerged that senior Tory MP Geoffrey Cox earned more than £1 million from legal aid work over the past year, on top of his taxpayer-funded £82,000 MP salary.
Well, he's currently being pursued by Labour, who suspect he used his taxpayer-funded office to complete some of his work. Well, here to discuss this further, we are going over now to our very own political correspondent, Tom Harwood. There he is, fantastic. Tom, just run us through this then. Do you think that Labour can smell blood in the water here?
I think the Labour Party has actually made a pretty significant misstep in the last week. What was a very narrow scandal focused on sleaze and lobbying specifically, focused in on Owen Paterson as well, has now been broadened out into a much larger discussion that risks pulling in many more MPs from all sides of the House, bringing this conversation from the universally agreed upon notion that lobbying should not be something that MPs do to this broader discussion about second jobs at all, whatever those second jobs may be, has really drawn a lot of trouble for the Labour Party, not least for the Labour Party's leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who's earned over £100,000 in the last 6 years as an MP doing legal work. Of course, many MPs do jobs beside their jobs as an MP. David Lammy, of course, hosts a radio show. Many MPs write columns for newspapers, others write books, some work in the NHS, some do legal work as well. And I think that really it damages the attack line. It makes the attack line a lot weaker when you go after a lot of those second jobs, almost all of those second jobs, many of which actually enhance the role of MPs. And there's broad agreement across the House that, for example, Chris Bryant's book writing, or back in the day Boris Johnson's column writing, were things that actually complemented their roles as MPs rather than detracted from them.
And Tom, Boris Johnson has been heavily criticised for not attending that debate over the issue the other day. What are people calling on him to do now? Some have said an independent review needs to be launched into all of this, that this needs to be reformed. What are MPs and others saying?
Well, the Labour Party had some demands of the Prime Minister at the beginning of this week, not least of all to promise that Owen Paterson would never be made a peer. Of course, there were some reports that Owen Paterson may be heading to the Lords after resigning as an MP. The Labour Party wanted the Prime Minister to explicitly rule that out. They also wanted a specific investigation into the case of the companies that Owen Paterson was working for and why they ended up with contracts over other companies. So those were some of the specific demands that the Labour Party was making of this government. But of course the Prime Minister happened to find himself up in the northeast on a hospital visit. It's remarkable how convenient that visit was. I'm sure it was long pre-planned and not at all an excuse to avoid being held to account in the House of Commons. I think there is a reasonable piece of analysis here that suggests that the Prime Minister is someone who, when the going gets tough, can sometimes rather slip away. When he was Foreign Secretary, he ended up on a visit to the Middle East in order, coincidentally at the same time as a vote on Heathrow expansion, something that affected his Uxbridge constituency. Similarly, there was the famous moment in the 2019 general election when reporters approached the Prime Minister and he walked into a fridge. Really, potentially what we're seeing here is a bit of a pattern. Will it damage the government, though? That's the big question. And yes, there has been a bit of a dip in the polls. On average, it's about level between the Conservatives and the Labour Party right now, but certainly a bit of a dip in the polls over the last week and a half. Will this sustain? Will the conversation move on? We've heard first about lobbying, now about MPs' jobs, and now also we're hearing about MP pay. The issue is becoming so broad, potentially it's becoming diluted.
Tom, I understand as well, I just saw something on Twitter that because obviously you're still in Scotland, you're still in Glasgow. I understand that you went out for a meal last night and there was a merging of two cultures on the plate at the same time, wasn't there, Tom? What happened?
Wow, I'm amazed you've brought this up. Indeed, I tweeted about the Chinese that the GBNews team went for last night, and indeed what there were haggis dumplings. Haggis dumplings, a remarkable blending of cultures, the very best of cultural appropriation.
Very much, Tom. As always, you're doing stellar work for us there north of the border. It's great to see it. Tom Harwood there, our political correspondent, just whizzing you through the old MP's second jobs scandal. I don't know. I don't really mind as long as it doesn't have any influence on their ability to be an MP or if they're lobbying or things like that. I think everyone's got a right for wealth creation.
Yeah, although it does worry me. Surely being an MP, you would think, is a big job, and you're handling 200,000 people, whatever the average is for a constituency, and there are people with concerns emailing you all the time. I know they have assistants, but something in me says that you should actually dedicate all of your time to. I'm sure there's never a boring day or never a day where you have nothing to do as an MP. But let's just go to some of your views very quickly before we get to a short break. We've spoken about quite a lot this morning, and I'm sure many of you will also be quite concerned now about what we just spoke about, the migrant channel crossings crisis.
Yes.
More boats are coming over today. 500 people made the journey yesterday. And actually, we're now almost at triple where we were this time last year in terms of the number of people. The whole of last year, actually, around 8,000 came over. Now we're about 22,000. That's what our editor, Home Affairs and Security editor, Mark White, was just telling us.
Yes, absolutely. And Mary's been in touch to say it's about what's been going on in the channel. Small boats today, but big boats tomorrow, potentially. Some of these people, she's saying, should be prosecuted because they've entered here illegally, I suppose, haven't they? I do wonder with that as well, though, then, part of the issue is what if our own border force is bringing them to our shores, can you actually then prosecute someone for illegally entering your country as well? If you've had to pick them up out of the channel.
Well, yeah, because they would have had to cross into your territory for our border force to have the right to take them in. So they're already here. They're just sort of rescuing them and bringing them inland. But
limbo.
Look, the solution's not easy, clearly, and Preeti Patel, this is clearly going to be something that she's going to be concerned about this morning, as are many of our viewers.
Yes, indeed, and as well, it's worth noting is what's happening on the Belarusian border, as thousands, really, of migrants are gathering there. They're being banned from entering places like Poland and Lithuania, so they're just kind of massing up, really, there, and that's going to pose massive problems going forward. I think that's definitely one to watch. But GB Views at gbnews.uk, keep your views coming in.
Yes, well, after the break, we'll be talking about Shamima Begum's husband, saying that ISIS will rise again, with Chip Chapman, who's the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. But first, let's give you the weather.
Hello again. Something of a north-south split with the weather today. Brighter skies across the north with some sunshine, much of the south fairly drab, with outbreaks of rain and drizzle for some as well. That's being caused by this rippling, wiggling weather fronts that's kind of grinding to a halt through the rest of today over the Midlands, parts of South Wales and East Anglia. So some outbreaks of rain likely here. The far southeast may see a little bit of brightness, but much of the southern half of the UK covered in cloud. Brighter skies for northern England, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland. In the far northwest, though, it is windy, and there will be a few showers coming in here, particularly over the Highlands. Temperatures across the north, 10, 11 at best with a bit of sunshine. It is pretty mild further south, 15, 16 in the London area, but it doesn't feel all that mild if you're stuck under that weather front and the cloud, rain and drizzle, which will continue on and off through the evening to push into parts of East Anglia, maybe down towards the southeast before tending to fizzle out. Another band of showery rain across northern Scotland. Otherwise largely dry, and some fog is likely. It could be quite thick through the early hours over parts of northern England, North Wales, southern Scotland, where things will turn quite chilly. Again, it will stay pretty mild overnight across the south. So another mild day here. Again, predominantly cloudy across the south. There'll be the odd shower coming into North Wales later, maybe southwest Scotland, northwest England, but some brightness likely across eastern areas. A bit of sunshine, but generally fairly cloudy. The breeze starting to strengthen, and notice behind me there are further bands of rain. That's tied into an area of low pressure that's going to bring more persistent rain across the country during Thursday evening and into Friday, and it will increase the winds as well. So that area of low pressure really will dominate from Thursday night onwards, bringing, as I say, a spell of wet and windy weather for most, coming in and then kind of fizzling out. So it turns drier through Saturday, and at the moment Sunday looks dry for much of the UK. Bye for now.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Yes, morning everyone. Now, the husband of former ISIS bride Shamima Begum has condemned the attacks on Europe carried out by the terror group, but he does believe that the organisation will build a caliphate. So, Dutch national Jago Regic, 29 years old, has admitted to being an ISIS fighter and married British-born Shamima when she was just 15 years old in 2015. He said the attacks on Europe were not Islamically responsible because innocent women and children were killed. So, it's nice to see where his lines are. However, he refused to comment on whether he condoned other aspects of their use of violence, such as beheadings, stonings, and the use of women as sex slaves.
Yes, despite being held at a detention camp in Syria, he wants to return home to the Netherlands, where he would face a prison sentence. While joining us now live from Salisbury is Chip Chapman, who is a former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Thank you for joining us this morning. What do you make of these comments, and why do you think it is that Shamima Begum and others like to occasionally, stick their head above the parapet and give us some analysis of ISIS?
Well, firstly, it adds to the dread hazard. We all hear about these things, and therefore we think that terrorism is larger than it is, particularly in Europe. That leads us to a position of threat inflation, particularly in Europe again, as I said, because if you look at the reality of the statistics in Europe, and I'm taking here the Europol statistics, there were 21 people killed in 10 terrorist attacks in the year to June 21. That is a different thing than saying there are largely large attacks in, for example, the Middle East, Syria and Iraq, and East and West Africa, where the wilayats or provinces of IS are still active. But let's not overblow that too. They are maybe a few thousand, and the chances of them governing again are probably in the range of 0 to 5%, which in intelligence terms is a remote chance.
This is just inflating the issue. But do you think when Shamima Begum's husband and Shamima, they go public with these sorts of things, that it's just their attempt to actually win over the favour of some of the people back in the West, because they ultimately do want to return back to the West?
It's partly that, and partly different audiences of those who still want to go and fight in the Middle East or maybe in Afghanistan. And that is because what we often see now is that jihadists are going local. That is, they are potentially abandoning some of the global aspects that Al-Qaeda underpinned with this view that, for example, America and the West were the far enemy who needed to be defeated before you took on the near enemy, the regimes that they didn't like in the Middle East. So, for example, they're underpinned by what we call the single narrative, that is, removal of Western influence from the Middle East, removal of what they see as apostate regimes from the Middle East, and then thirdly, the re-establishment of the caliphate. You've got to understand what the caliphate is in their terms. The caliphate, from their perspectives, was the caliphate of the prophetic order. That is what they call the Salaf. Salaf, that's the pious predecessors, those things that underpinned how regimes operated in the first 3 generations of Islam. And it is that why they brought the methods of slavery, torture, beheading, killing of gays to their methodology. And when you bring that methodology to bear, you are rejected. So that's why the chances, again, of the caliphate being re-established in those areas are very, very small. And they always have, as they showed when they took over this territory, the jihadist governance dilemma, in the same way that the Taliban have a Taliban governance dilemma in Afghanistan. People still need to eat at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you a bit about that, actually, the Afghanistan situation, the Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan, I believe that the Taliban have called it now. Is that just a different version of a caliphate? Is that almost like their own caliphate, as it were?
Not really. There are different schools of theology in Islam, and in Afghanistan they are underpinned by the Hanafi school, a Deobandi school, whereas the caliphate people in the Middle East are underpinned by Salafists, the Wahhabist aspect, and ISK are Salafists. And the Taliban will mallet them because they are malleting Salafists. The Taliban effectively are kind of Afghan nationalists with a Deobandi hint.
Gosh, I tell you what, it almost sounds like a something nice, or Afghan nationalists with a Deobandi hint. It sounds like something that you'd say when you have a nice sip of a full-bodied red wine or something like that. But obviously, it's something completely different. Thank you very much, Chip, for coming on board the show today. Chip Chapman, who's the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Yeah, the idea that you've got these people sitting there wallowing in these refugee camps, or not even refugee camps, are they? I suppose holding pens for former ISIS terrorists, and that they still hold out hope of coming back to this country one day or to mainland Europe. I find that quite scary, really. I mean, it does say something, doesn't it, that the individual, that Shamima Begum's husband, absolutely thinks that the caliphate, well, he's saying anyway, absolutely thinks that the caliphate will return yet again, and he's not really, I don't think he's really changing his views, is he?
No, not at all. And obviously they've realised the consequences of their actions, and their dream of this sort of ISIS utopia hasn't manifested, and now they want to come back, essentially. I think that's quite rational, but, sadly for them, I don't think, and I should hope that they will never return the likes of Shamima Begum. No,
well, let's delve into my inbox now. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Graham has been in touch. He says that we need a new Home Secretary and a panel of Australian immigration officers immediately. This is in relation to the fact that already today it looks as though several hundred migrants have crossed the Channel, 500 yesterday, and now last week we had another record-breaking day. You can imagine those records are going to keep tumbling. And yeah, some people blame Gerard, blaming Emmanuel Macron for the situation that's taking place in the Channel, saying that he could be stopping it if he wanted to. And yeah, there's lots is going about what Belarus is doing to Poland, France has been doing to the UK for the past 2 years. There is no difference.
There is parallel, isn't there, in those two situations, in terms of migrants, the Channel sort of being that gateway between the two countries, and then France sort of ferrying them in this direction, and then we want to sort of do it in the other direction. But ultimately, let's not forget that the people who are going to bear the brunt of this are the people in the local communities who sort of have to have this influx of people. And I believe most people are very compassionate towards people who are genuine refugees, but 22,000 in a year, that's a huge strain on social services and the local economies and communities. So it's a very difficult one.
Yes, indeed. Well, after the break, we will be unpicking the very latest comments from Harry and Meghan with political commentator Andre Walker. But before that, a look at this morning's news.
I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. A survivor of child sexual exploitation is calling for the resignations of the Rotherham Council leader and the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. It comes after GB News revealed up to 1,600 children may have been at risk of grooming in the borough since 2017. Labour has called for a standards investigation into Sir Geoffrey Cox's private work for the British Virgin Islands inquiry. The Conservative MP is accused of misusing his parliamentary office for his second job, where he earned hundreds of thousands of pounds giving legal advice. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner says the actions appear to be a brazen breach of the rules. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries will scrutinise a first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. The paper, published this morning, urges nations to revisit and strengthen their emissions targets for 2030 so that global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Wales has announced COVID passes will be required to enter cinemas, theatres and concert halls from Monday. Protesters have been demonstrating against the extended measures. Currently, proof of full vaccination or a negative test result is only needed for nightclubs and large events. Prince Harry claims he warned Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey that his site was allowing a coup to be staged a day before the January riots at the US Capitol. It comes as a federal judge rejected the former President Donald Trump's request to block the release of documents to the House committee investigating the incident. You're right up to date. I'll be back with all of today's top stories at 12 o'clock.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, a collection of papers and interviews by over 50 Welsh female politicians have been gathered by Women's Archive Wales to mark their spot in history. Members of Parliament, the Senate and the Welsh Youth Parliament have contributed to the archive by telling stories about their careers and achievements and hopes for making their workspace more inclusive. Our Wales reporter Lily Hewitson has more.
Capturing the stories of women in Welsh politics, an archive has been opened which documents the achievements and experiences of women who've stood in office since the birth of Welsh devolution over 20 years ago. The project, called Setting the Record Straight, has taken 2.5 years to get to this point. A collection of English and Welsh language interviews and papers aims to protect the stories of these women and highlights their contribution to politics in Wales.
It captures the importance of recognising what women in Wales have done in terms of devolution. I mean, as I said, I was one of the first Assembly members who came here in 1999. And, it was a very different place. And it does show how, you know, what Wales has achieved. For whatever reason, if you look at the records of women in politics, we find that not as many women will put forward their political papers as men. I don't know why, it's just one of those things. But we've encouraged a lot of the women now to hand over their papers, say, to the National Library or local archives. This is an important record because it's not just about them. I mean, it's about history. It's about showing the history of Wales, but it's also about inspiring future generations. But what we've done today through this project is to sort of, as we said, set the record straight and to make sure that women's voices and their histories and their stories will be part of this certain time in Wales. Our democracy is poorer if we don't have a diverse representation of both men and women. You know, it's not just women who suffer, it's men as well. So it is really important we get this right for our democracy.
From the very start, the Senedd has exceeded the proportion of female members in comparison to similar legislative assemblies and parliaments. Following the elections in 2003, it became the first legislature to achieve gender balance, an event of international significance.
And when I heard I was elected, it was one of the best days of my life. I'd done so much work leading up to it, you know, with school, going around my school, making sure everyone was heard, that I think it's just really important that, like, as females, we are, like, our Welsh Youth Parliament is almost equal, you know what I mean? And it's just incredible to be able to go down, and the experiences that I had, like I mentioned, was absolutely incredible. Like, I just met so many inspirational women, inspirational people, and it's just really inspired me that I can, in the future, go and make something of myself, and I can become a woman in politics now, and I'm just really proud to represent that. I hope it becomes a much more inclusive space. I mean, you know, we've gone so far already with it. I do think there's always like room to improve, and I think like there's so much more that we can be seen done, but I think that we are in a really good pathway to making sure that as women we are heard in society.
I suppose I'm in a unique position in the fact that I was elected in 2003 to the then National Assembly for Wales at just the age of 23, and now 2 decades later I'm back after a break, having children and everything, to come into the Welsh Parliament now. And I suppose some things have changed, but there's a lot that hasn't changed, which I found quite disappointing. When I came in 2003, there was 50-50 of representation. It felt like a real special time to be involved in politics. That we're getting more women involved. We were a fairer reflection of society, and all parties managed to get that representation. I was one of the first 2 women Conservatives. And it was more significant to be a woman then, even more significant than being 23 and being the youngest parliamentarian in 100 years. I found it more weight on my shoulders being a woman and making sure that I did a good job, and I'm sure everyone else felt the same here today, to make people realise that women could do this role just as well, if not better, than men. I think there's a lot more that can be done from all parties. I think some have said that the word progressive in the beginning have taken a step back, as well as my own party. I think there's a lot of positive things happening now. I think, for example, on the number of council candidates in Monmouthshire County Council, for example, in the Conservative Party are 50-50. So we're starting to get somewhere. And that's what we need to be. We need to be a fair reflection of society. And I think young people coming forward and their views and listening to them is such an important part of democracy. I think we've got the Welsh Youth Parliament here now, and it is mind-blowing the things that they come up with, and often we can learn a lot from them. So yes, please come forward into politics as much as you can. It is as a much better environment to come into now, being a woman. It's really welcoming, and people are getting positions, key positions like mine of Shadow Education Minister, etc., chair of my group in the Senedd. It's much more progressive than it used to be. So come and join us.
From what we've heard today, so much has been achieved by women in politics here in Wales, but so much more still needs to be done, particularly with bringing those gender balance numbers back to what they were in 2003. But the stories of these women have now been recorded for future generations to reflect upon. Lily Hewitson, GB News.
Yeah, thank you very much for that report. Now, public trauma first aid kits are being unveiled today to increase survival rates in terror attacks and serious stabbings. UK Counter-Terrorism Police, St John's Ambulance and Citizen Aid, a group founded by civilian and military doctors, want venues like football stadiums to install them. The military-grade equipment could be used by members of the public before emergency services reach serious incidents.
Yes, well, our East of England reporter Amelia Harper has the latest.
This idea was formed between three major groups: UK Counter-Terrorism, St John Ambulance and Citizen Aid, as you said, a group formed by civilian and military doctors, as well as other healthcare organisations and charities that have contributed towards this kit. And essentially, they just want to save as many lives as they can in the aftermath of serious events like terror attacks, stabbings and other major trauma incidents, for example, like car accidents. These kits would give the public access to equipment able to treat major trauma, and these types of things generally aren't available in normal first aid kits, things like military-grade dressings and tourniquets, for example, and it would help them to help treat casualties before emergency services arrive. But where do the groups want these installed? Well, places like the football club behind me, train stations, music arenas, those sorts of places, in the hope that the public will be able to act and intervene quickly if a situation like a terror attack or a stabbing were to occur. And these are all part of new standards for first aid provision for seriously injured people, and these are actually the first types of first aid standards like this that are being set out in the UK. The idea is that they will contain the same bits of equipment wherever you are in the country, and the long-term aim of this is that they are going to be rolled out across the country and taken up by venues such as the one behind me, so that the public has access to the same thing and they can get familiar with the kit wherever they are. But let's take a look at what is in the kit. What do they contain? Well, firstly, we've become very familiar with this over the last few years: PPE. They have disposable gloves, masks and also glasses. They contain scissors, large wound dressings, tourniquets, CPR face shields, marker pens. Now, this might sound like a strange one, but it seems quite obvious when you think about it. If you put a tourniquet on, they provide a marker pen for you to write down the time of this, and also clear visual instructions so that anyone faced with a casualty with serious injuries will be able to follow the step-by-step instructions to try to save their life. Now, I've spoken to Dr. Lynn Thomas. She is the medical director at St John Ambulance, and she says there are currently no first aid kits like this available or out there in the UK.
The idea of bringing in these standards about what should be in a kit for public access is the fact that there is no consistent way that the public would know what to do or have any access to equipment to look after somebody who'd been involved in trauma. Trauma can be anything. It might be a road traffic accident, it might be, unfortunately, a stabbing or a terrorist attack, but it's just so that the public will know what is available for them to be able to help somebody that's in front of them. And that's what we all want to do. We all want to be able to help somebody, but we need to be able to people to have the equipment to do it.
If the public isn't first aid trained, how will they be able to use this kit?
That's one of the fantastic things about it, is you open up the kit and it's got a card in there which has really clear directions about what you should do. And it's not just that, yes, there are words, but obviously not everybody in this country can speak English, not everybody can read. We've got lots of people who come and visit us, fortunately. So this is a pictorial images of what you should do. So the three things it tells you how to do is put somebody in the recovery position. Because if they've not got major trauma that you can see, but they're not conscious, you want to protect their airway. So you put them in their recovery position. The next thing we ask you to be able to do is try and stop a stab wound or a bleeding wound by putting pressure on it. And there's special wound dressings in the packs. And then if that doesn't work and it's a limb, how you would use the tourniquet that's in there. And we know that tourniquets save lives. We saw that unfortunately, in Iraq and Afghanistan.
So it's hoped that these kits will be taken up at major venues across the UK, so that if the public were to find themselves in a situation such as a terror attack, a major stabbing or a trauma incident, that they would know what to do. And ultimately they want these to be as accessible and as commonplace as public access defibrillators.
Right, thank you very much, Amelia, for that report. Hopefully it just helped to save lives, essentially, on the streets of Bristol. We had defibrillators, didn't we? They all came in, and that's unquestionably saved countless lives up and down the country now, so maybe this is... It's the one. I mean, it would also be nice if people stopped stabbing each other, though, to be fair.
I think the underlying problem is...
Yes, it's the terror and the stabbing.
Yes.
Yes, well, anyway. Prince Harry claims he warned Twitter boss Jack Dorsey that his platform was allowing a coup to be staged the day before the riots at the US Capitol.
Donald Trump fans stormed the Capitol building in January in protest over his presidential defeat. We all remember those scenes, and that left 5 people dead. And the Prince says he's not heard from the Twitter CEO since.
Meanwhile, his wife Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, is suspected of lying in her case against Associated Newspapers Limited after the court appeal heard a letter to her father published by the Mail on Sunday was written with public consumption in mind as a possibility. So lawyers for the publisher told senior judges they wanted to rely on new evidence from Jason Nauf, who was communications secretary to the Duke and Duchess, which suggests that Meghan suspected her father might disclose the letter to the media.
Yes, the High Court had previously ruled in Meghan's favour, deciding that the Mail's publication of the letter was unlawful. While joining us now to unpack both of these stories is political commentator Andre Walker. Thanks for joining us. What do you make of all this? They're making the headlines yet again, aren't they?
Well, first of all, great to be on the show for the first time with my old mate Patrick. But anyway, let me just say to you, when I was a little boy, my grandmother sat me down and said that she'd invented the tape player. I said, how is this possible, Gran? And she said, because when I first listened to the wireless, I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if we had a way of taping the music? And I said to her, well, that is not inventing the tape deck. The fact that Prince Harry noticed it may well kick off as a result of Donald Trump not being president is not an earth-shattering thing to anybody with any sanity whatsoever. First of all, they boarded up the entirety of the Capitol ahead of a prospective riot. The fact that he noticed the day before that there might be a bit of trouble just talks to the fact that this is a selfish, self-centred moron who really doesn't have a clue what he's talking about.
Well, there's an element of being quite self-entitled here. It's like he's emailed the CEO of Twitter, which is the guy's got a lot on, right? You know, and then he's like, well, and I never heard back. It's like shouting into the ether, isn't it? I mean, who does he think he is?
I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like saying, oh, you know, at this weekend's football match, I'm going to email Manchester United and predict that people might chant. I mean, it's just so self-evidently obvious that people were arguing on Twitter and there was going to be some sort of trouble at the Capitol. As I say, they boarded up most of the buildings in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks in advance. They knew full well that this sort of thing was going to take place. The problem is with him, and I think you and I have discussed this before, Patrick, on other shows, he is somebody who's hearing all this for the first time. He comes from an incredibly insular background. He's got, 2 GCSEs, a D in geography and a C in art. Apparently earned himself, though there is some debate over exactly what took place at Eton College A-level department. But okay, let's give him credit for the 2 A-levels. The thing is with him, because he is seeing all this stuff for the first time, he thinks what he is noticing is groundbreaking, whereas in reality, it doesn't mean anything at all. But I will say one thing. If we are going to talk about predicting riots, if we are going to talk about political violence and trouble, look no further than the woke brigade that he represents, who have no interest in democracy, no interest in freedom, no interest in ordinary people. They want to tell all of us that every single man you come across is a rapist. They want to tell us that the European Union is absolutely marvellous. They want to tell us that Joe Biden is sane, which I think is an unbelievable claim, even by Meghan Markle's standards. I think that it's people like them that are responsible for all this trouble. And the fact that they've noticed they caused it, I mean, it's neither here nor there. To me, as I say, it reminds me of when my grandmother invents the tape deck. Equally ridiculous.
Yeah, so just about Meghan as well, you know, she's kind of facing accusations of potentially being a little bit squiffy with the truth when it comes to this letter, that now infamous letter, of course, that was sent to her father. What do you make of all that? Do you think that there's a chance that Meghan maybe has lied?
look, I don't want to be critical of the Birmingham Evening Post, but when it came to the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, even the Birmingham Evening Post was printing inside sources on what Meghan Markle was thinking. And what was she thinking? She was saying to the Queen that she felt that she didn't have a significant enough role in the funeral, and therefore was demanding that a autographed letter from her be placed on top of the coffin. Now, this is somebody so crass and so self-obsessed that they are sending press releases to the Birmingham Evening Post complaining that they didn't have a big enough role in their husband's grandfather's funeral because they were away on the other side of the channel, demanding a prominent space that could be seen on television. We see this time and time again with celebrities where they constantly use the media, and then if the media give a whiff of criticism in their direction, suddenly they start whinging and moaning. My advice to these two is you can do exactly what happened to, that lady from ABBA. For 20 years, she just moved to a village in Sweden, never talked to anyone, and the media didn't publish anything. These people are camera hungry. These people are self-obsessed. You know what? If what they did was go and work in a call centre, which is all they're talented to do, then nobody would care. But they're not willing to do that.
Absolutely.
What's a shame.
Andre, thank you very much. I know it's the first time that we've had interaction on this particular show. It certainly won't be the last. Andre Walker, political commentator, wheeling us through, essentially what Harry and Meghan have been up to. They're never out of the news, are they now?
No, certainly not. Well, let's.
It's a good job they got the privacy, though.
Let's just squeeze in some of your views. We don't have long left till the end of the show, so let's give you the last word on our email, gbviews@gbnews.
Yes. Okay. All right. So, what's happening in our country? This is according to Bray. Bray is saying that there's a lot of issues that are going on at the moment when it comes to what's happening in the channel. Also, is responding to my monologue that I did at the start of the show about whether or not the police were a bit heavy-handed. There was a terminally ill man. He flashed a speed camera, and the police went round and essentially kicked his fence in, and then knelt on him in his own back garden. He's wondering what on earth has our country come to. So there we are. That's Brian. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's it from us here at To The Point today. But don't go away. Up next is The Briefing with Gloria De Piero with Prime Minister's questions.
Hello again. Something of a north-south split with the weather today. Brighter skies across the north with some sunshine, much of the south fairly drab with outbreaks of rain and drizzle for some as well. That's being caused by this rippling, wiggling weather fronts that's kind of grinding to a halt through the rest of today over the Midlands, parts of South Wales and East Anglia. So some outbreaks of rain likely here. The far southeast may see a little bit of brightness, but much of the southern half of the UK covered in cloud. Brighter skies for northern England, southern Scotland, Northern Ireland. In the far northwest, though, it is windy, and there will be a few showers coming in here, particularly over the Highlands. Temperatures across the north, 10, 11 at best with a bit of sunshine. It is pretty mild further south, 15, 16 in the London area, but it doesn't feel all that mild if you're stuck under that weather front and the cloud, rain and drizzle, which will continue on and off through the evening to push into parts of East Anglia, maybe down towards the southeast before tending to fizzle out. Another band of showery rain across northern Scotland. Otherwise largely dry, and some fog is likely. It could be quite thick through the early hours over parts of northern England, North Wales, southern Scotland, where things will turn quite chilly. Again, it will stay pretty mild overnight across the south. So another mild day here. Again, predominantly cloudy across the south. There'll be the odd shower coming into North Wales later, maybe southwest Scotland, northwest England, but some brightness likely across eastern areas. A bit of sunshine, but generally fairly cloudy. The breeze starting to strengthen, and notice behind me there are further bands of rain. That's tied into an area of low pressure that's going to bring more persistent rain across the country during Thursday evening and into Friday, and it will increase the winds as well. So that area of low pressure really will dominate from Thursday night onwards, bringing, as I say, a spell of wet and windy weather for most, coming in and then kind of fizzling out. So it turns drier through Saturday, and at the moment Sunday looks dry for much of the UK. Bye for now.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.